before we get started, I'm going to just show you a little bit about roughly what we're going to talk about. So we're going to bring somebody along later who recently got a 3,100 in the UCAT. So an amazing score. Like I say, everything over 3,000 is typically in the top 3 to 5%. And I'll talk about why that's important. But before we do that, let's do a few polls just to get everybody kind of in the say in teaching mode or engagement mode. So let's do as I said, I'm at the moment I'm admitting and trying to chat at the same time. But in the poll now, just tell me, how important do you think the UCAT exam is? Let's have a chat about that. Cool. So submit your votes. We've got about, I'll give you another 15 seconds. So you've got a few options. So couple left to vote. I'll just admit a few more people while you guys are doing that. Okay, cool. Right, let's close it. So people have put, I'll share the results now. Now, while I'm doing this, because I say this talk we're going to do today, these are the kind of things that we're going to talk about, and I'm going to talk about preparing. But really, what I would love in the chat before we get started is, because we're at this stage now where the UCAT is actually around the corner, we're only about 4 weeks away. What I would love to hear in the chat is maybe some bits that you would like me to cover today. So here we can be a little bit more fluid with it, and I can kind of ad lib. And like I say, we've got somebody later who scored really highly in the UCAT who's going to be coming and answering questions in about 25 minutes. So they'll be taking questions, but also in the chat, if you'd like to post some things that you would like me to cover specifically, any questions, any worries, any particular things that you're not sure about or you are worried about or anything like that, I'm happy to cover them for you in this talk. So let's look at these results. So UCAT importance. So this is a little bit of a trick question, because the UCAT is kind of simultaneously overvalued and underestimated. Now, the thing with the UCAT is that it is the difficulty that people have, and the reason that people do badly in it is because they either sacrifice accuracy, which is obvious, you need a certain percentage to score well, and speed. But speed is probably the bigger one, because people spend too much time getting answers right, and then that means that they don't complete the exam. And that's the number one thing that happens. A lot of people, a high percentage of people, don't actually get to the end of the exam. So the goal is speed and accuracy. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that for how we're going to achieve those things. So let me just so like I say, in this poll, people always think it's the number one most important thing. And it all a very important thing. And it is very important, but it's not the be all and end all of the application. If you're not on my YouTube channel already, I would strongly recommend that you have a look, because the reason, I'll introduce myself properly in a second. But the reason our program has so much success is that we're not just looking at UCAT, we're looking at everything, right? It's the application to medicine and dentistry is about being the whole package. So we need to make sure that we've covered that. So let me have a quick look in the chat. So what is the most efficient way of analyzing errors within mocks to improve incrementally? Okay, great. Speed tips, type 2 questions, cheat sheet, the best way to practice verbal reasoning, how do you manage your time throughout the exam? Thanks for doing this. When are you? Okay, so any questions kind of about your personal application? The best way is probably to just, I'll talk about that later. That's fine. Okay, cool. So just a little bit about me. So why I'm giving this talk, I've been doing this for a long time now, ridiculously long. So I've been, I've got into both medicine and dentistry, and I'm an admissions application expert. But more so for over probably about 13 years now, I've been teaching this stuff. So our program, the FutureDoc one-on-one coaching programs, had ridiculous success now with getting students in. And, during that time, we've learned a lot. We've got a lot of data. We've picked up on a lot of things and are constantly fine tuning the science of making a really perfect application, if you want to call it that. My mantra is, or my guiding question is always, how can we design a program that puts someone through it and guarantees that they get a place? Now, obviously, nothing in life is guaranteed. You can never guarantee anything, but it's that if you shoot for the stars, you might just hit the moon, sort of thing. That's why we have such a high success rate, is because we're aiming for 100%. And when we get in the high 90s, mid 90s, that's I'm still aiming to but boost that up to 100. That's a pretty good success rate, considering the average person has about a 16% success rate for undergraduates for medicine, and it's about a 3% success rate for graduates. So these are the kind of things that we need to really be thinking about very closely to make sure that we boost that up. So like I say, ask questions throughout, and I will tailor this talk a bit around what you guys need. So I'll do a couple more polls to ask you some questions. So what is your biggest concern about the UCAT? So type in the chat. So we've already got some things that you want me to cover specifically, but what is it particularly about the UCAT that you are concerned about? And I'll give you a minute to type. Is it a particular section? Is it a particular aspect of it? Is it how you prepare? What exactly is it that is worrying you? So we've got coming through timing, speed, focus and speed, not being able to comprehend VR yet, time management, I'll probably not be able to finish yet, what we talked about, knowing which questions to strategically skip, yeah, we can talk about that. Time management, ability to recognize abstract reasoning patterns, scoring low on the testing day, yeah, I think that's everybody's worry, right? That I work very hard for it, but in the end I don't do well. Okay, yeah, we can talk about that. Timing and preparation. Let's see, how long do I need to prepare? Understanding questions. How should the balance be with skipping, investing time to actually understand the question, speed and accuracy? Okay, cool. Okay, no problem. So, can you guys still see that? Great. So, how important is the UCAT? We talked about that. So, at this stage, just in the chat again, just a yes or no. How much of the basics do we need to understand? Do you guys understand the basics of the test? Do you want me to cover all of that sort of stuff, or do you, would you like me to cover that stuff, or are you kind of happy that you understand how the test works? Just a yes for if you'd like me to cover it, no if you're happy to skip past it. Okay, so mostly, yeah, most people understand. Okay, cool. So we'll leave that, but the main thing that I will tell you for the UCAT is that you need to consider this like a performance, right? It's not like your, I don't know, history GCSE where you asked to remember a load of facts and then, regurgitate them. This is the opposite. In fact, you need no outside knowledge for the UCAT, and it's discouraged to especially for the verbal reasoning, when they're talking about things that you might know a little bit about, they will purposely word things that are actually maybe factually incorrect in the real world, and they're trying to catch you out based on your own knowledge of something, because they're actually curious about what's in the text, not what you know of this going into the exam. So outside knowledge can hurt you, so just be very careful with relying on that. So we won't talk about the sections, but here are the timings and here's how it works. UCAT, as we know, it's scored. So the most that you can get for sections 1 to 4, is 3,600. The lowest you can get is 1,200. And SJT, we're aiming for a band 1 or 2, ideally 1, but yeah, top 2 really. Just the biggest question I get is, are there retakes? You only get, so the window is early July to the end of September, and you only get one shot. You don't get to take it again. So yeah, just bear that in mind. Make sure that you're ready for it. Now, scores. So I won't go too much into scores, but like the average, or all you need to know really is that lately the 2,500 mark is about average, right? And you can probably, it depends on the circumstance. This is where I talk about, the UCAT being underestimated but overvalued. We have people every year who they do the UCAT, they just kind of go it alone, don't get a great score, so then they come to us and ask for help. And we regularly get people in with a probably like 2,600 kind of score, and it's still it's still very doable with that sort of thing, as long as the rest of the application is well-rounded and of good quality. So that's the kind of argument for the UCAT not being the be-all and end-all. But if we can get a really good score, it really does help us take control of the application. So that is why, with my students, 3,000 is the goal, because 3,000 will pretty much, obviously, there are some obvious exceptions, but 3,000 plus will pretty much get you in front of any interview panel, whether that's MMI, an MMI circuit, so the multiple mini interviews, which is one of the ways that some medical schools interview, but also the panel interviews themselves. But essentially what I'm saying is that will almost certainly get you to interview, as long as you meet the other eligibility criteria and the rest of your application is sound. Now, the problem with just focusing on the UCAT is that people who just think about getting a high UCAT score will get to interview, but they won't get past interview. So this is why I want you guys to just bear in mind that although we're obviously aiming to do great in this particular aptitude test, and it is important, don't forget the other elements, because they are equally important. And every year, without fail, we always get people who come to us who didn't get in the previous year, so they've come to us for help with the second attempt, or sometimes third, fourth. We've had people who've come after 5 failed attempts, and we've got them in on the 6th. And we realize that a lot of people, like more than ever, we're getting people who get 4 interviews and not a single offer, and it's because they've not thought, they've basically just focused on UCAT stuff. They've not thought about all the other stuff, because when they get to interview, they see that maybe they're not a great candidate other than having a great UCAT score. So, we need to focus on all of the application, and that is equally a little bit daunting, because we want to get a good UCAT score whilst focusing on all that other stuff, but also a bit reassuring that other elements or redeeming features of our application can help us, still get in, despite maybe not the most optimal UCAT score. Okay. Okay, so I've got a few questions. Based on your data, is there a best time and date to sit the exam? So no, it depends on you. So time of the day, I'm the kind of person that I prefer exams in the morning, first thing. Some people prefer exams in the afternoon. That is something that we'll talk about, is kind of like preparing at the time that you're going to sit your exam. So get your mind used to being able to sit that exam, to deliver that performance, which is what the UCAT is. It's a performance of skills, and be able to do that on demand at the time. So if you've got a 10 a.m. exam, make sure that, especially in the week leading up to it, you're practicing every day at 10 a.m. In terms of date, so that when to sit the UCAT, with my with my students, for example, on our program, the first thing that we'll do is we'll sit down and have a really detailed strategy call about all of this stuff. But when we're considering the UCAT, I would always say you need to consider 3 things. The first is you need to have enough time to prepare. Obviously, you need enough time to revise, to get a good grade, and that's a discussion that is personal to you. Some people it's a few weeks, some people it's a couple of months, some people it's a bit more, and it's really kind of getting a good understanding of where you're at with everything before we can decide how long you personally individually need. The second thing is that you need to have it minimally encroaching on other, I'll call it other life events, right? That could be school exams, could be, if you've got a big family wedding and, like a sibling or, somebody in your very immediate family is getting married. That's going to be a massive thing that's going to take up a lot of your time if you're going on holiday. All of those sorts of things you need to bear in mind. and have it minimally encroach on all of those things. Your school exams are really, really important, whether that's university or A levels or any international exams. It's really important that you don't ignore those, because all of the application stuff, if you don't get the grades, if you don't meet the eligibility criteria, it's all practically for nothing, because you one of the least negotiable things, we were talking about, well, can you get away with a not great UCAT score? Can you get away with a not amazing work experience? The one real non-negotiable really is if you don't meet the eligibility criteria. So if they give you a conditional offer based on certain grades and you don't meet that, that is almost certainly going to be the case that you don't, the offer doesn't get realized. So all of this stuff, remember that, keep in mind your academics as well, because like I say, all of this is kind of for nothing if we don't get the scores that we need in terms of our whatever we're sitting, A levels, IB, university degree, etc. So okay, so let's move on. We've had a few. Is this 3,000 for grad or undergrad med? So actually, funnily enough, I've just made a video that I'm going to release in a few hours today, specifically for graduates sitting the UCAT. And in fact, let me pop if you guys are not already on the YouTube channel, check it out, because I've just posted it in the chat now, because there are loads of videos that I bring out. We're bringing out 2 a week now, and it's keeping you up to date with all the stuff that you need at the right time based on the application. So yeah, have a look at that sort of stuff. So yeah, sorry, in terms of 3,000 for undergrads or grad, I would say 3,000 anyway. Obviously for grad, it's more competitive, so it's more important that you're getting that. For grads, I typically say, forget the deciles. You just want to be aiming for as high as possible. For an undergrad, you can pretty much get into most universities with being in the top 2 deciles. And not that, like I say, there are exceptions, but for most places, that's the kind of score that will get you in, into most universities, again, as part of a well-rounded application. Now, I wasn't, so we were asking about when to book the UCAT. So I said, firstly, enough time to prepare, minimal encroachment on other life events. And then finally, the third one is time for a plan B. Now, that plan B might be that we're going to sit the BMAT and we need to just make sure that we have enough time to prepare. It might be that we have an okay score, but we just need to allow a bit of time to do some research. So let's say, if you sit the UCAT on the 29th of September on the final day and you don't get the score you want, you've only given yourself until the 15th of October to go away and do some really detailed research about where you should apply based on your score, based on all the other elements of your application that are strong or weak. So you need to allow yourself time for that. Again, we want to do it early enough so that if we do sit the BMAT, we're allowing, about 8 weeks or so to prepare for that. Again, if you're a grad and you might want to consider doing the GAMSAT, just thinking of ways that we can have a plan B. Okay, cool. So let's move on. So here are the deciles. Like I say, my attitude is always we should aim to just get the best score we can. Yeah. So deciles do matter, but here I'm thinking, the theme of the talk is to get a 3,000 plus score, right? So a 3,000 will blow all of these out of the water, but it's kind of, especially if you're going for grad, it's what's necessary to really make sure that you take control of the application, like I say, excuse me, and to take control of the application and essentially, I won't say guarantee because nothing's guaranteed, but give yourself a very good chance of getting in front of the interview panels and all those people. Cool. So when it comes to, sorry, I'm just adding more people. When it comes to the SJT bands, what we want to do is basically really the SJT band. There are a few universities that will focus on that and give you extra points based on that. So again, if you don't do great in the first 4 sections, but you've got a really good SJT, then there are certain universities that you could apply to that would give you a better chance or favor you more. But really, I would say the aim with the SJT is to not, not screw the pooch, as they say in the States. So essentially, don't get in the bottom two bands. Basically, you can't get in anywhere with a band 4. You can get into some, but not many universities with a band 3. So really what we want to do is make sure that we get in the top 2 bands, generally as a rule. Someone's asking me, what are the SJT bands? So the SJT, so you basically, your score, you'll get a tallied score. The way it works is that, so they will give you a scenario, and they will say on a kind of like on a 4-point scale. So let's say, for example, you're at work and you catch a nurse stealing, right? So they will say something like, so once you're in that scenario, how good of a way to deal, how much of an appropriate action is it to, and then they will say, shout at the nurse in front of everybody. Is that a very appropriate thing to do? Appropriate but not ideal, not the best but not the worst, and a very inappropriate thing to do. And you have to basically rate those things as to how effective that course of action is for that specific scenario. The key takeaway with the SJT is not to assess how bad the initial scenario is. It's how good or how bad the proposed action is in the context of what's happened. So this bad thing has happened. So now that we're in this situation, how good, bad, whatever is this particular thing? How well would this deal with the situation? So then you get scores based on, let's say if the right answer is that it's a very good thing to do, a very appropriate thing to do, you basically get points based on how far off you are from that answer. So if you get the right one, you get full points. If you get the next best one, you get a few less points. And then, all the way to, if you're really far away from it, you don't get anything. Now, then that score gets tallied up, and you then get categorized into a band. So the top 14%, so let's say in 2022, the top 20% would have been in band 1, the top 36% would have been in in band 2, and so on and so forth. So they kind of create like a normal distribution curve, and people, once you hit a certain threshold, you get into a certain band, and that's pretty much how it works. So so why do we think, let me do a little poll now. So why do we think students score poorly on the UCAT? Let me launch this. Let me just have a look which one it is. Okay, let me launch this poll for you. Let's see, tell me what you think. So in the poll now, you can cast your votes. Tell me why people score badly in the UCAT. Okay, perfect. So we said it before. Incorrect. Well, all of these are important, but they contribute to the biggest factor, which is running out of time. So we want to make sure, like I say, speed and accuracy is the most important thing. So let's go back to the chat. So to the presentation. So what's a good score? We kind of know now, looking at the deciles. We talked about it. Top 2 really for undergrads, but really we want to be aiming for a 3,000 plus. So here's the timeline. Again, just to reiterate that the booking opens at 6 a.m. on the 20th of June. So let's make sure that we're there for that and ready. This is, if you go on, I gave a different version of this talk a few months ago, and I talked about the UCAT in the context of where it lands in the application cycle. So, where it is in the context of everything, and just helping you understand that it's part of a bigger beast, really. So, so what does the UCAT, what does each section consist of? I won't talk about this too much because we know that verbal reasoning is the reading comprehension, decision making is the logical element, quantitative reasoning is your maths or numeracy skills, abstract reasoning is your kind of That's more like the IQ test, understanding shapes and how things fit together. And the situational judgment is the ethical side of things. Now, here's probably what people want to know more about. So if you guys, sorry, just people asking me for the timeline. If you go to the website and you go into free resources, in fact, let me just put in the chat. So if you go to that link in the chat now, you can go to under courses, there's free resources, and you can get that timeline. But in terms of how to prepare, so I always kind of think of it in 3 phases. The first is you need to familiarize yourself with the types of questions. So you need a really reliable resource that is going to tell you everything about what kind of questions come up, what the techniques are, which ones are the most accurate and the speediest, to just help you understand exactly when you face these questions, what you need to do. The second phase, and I'll send you a link to a discount for a course in a couple of hours once we've finished this, for a resource that you can use. The second thing that you want to do is start practicing questions. So putting what you've learned into practice. Now, that's when I would say start doing untimed questions. And really the aim for doing untimed questions is to hit about 80%. And once you get in 80% correct, I'd say you've got the gist of it enough to understand, to kind of start implementing, to understand you've got the gist of it enough to start increasing the time and understand how fast you need to go. So what I would recommend with doing this is taking one section at a time. And it's the difference between, small progress in all 5 sections versus, spending 2 or 3 days at a time on one section, having massive improvement. And then just all you need to do is then maintain that new level that you've reached. And then you can move on to the next, focus on that, occasionally come back to the other sections to make sure that you maintain that level. But really with intense focus on each individual one, you can really show massive improvement rather than, like I say, incremental improvement in all the 5 at the same time. Then phase 3, like I say, so is going on to time practice. Now, I would say time practice is a bit like I would consider it a bit like what weightlifters do, and they call it progressive overload. So a weightlifter, might be good at doing, a bench at 100 kilos, and then they're used to that. So then what they might do is they'll try 100. So they say about 4% improvement is the sweet spot between it not being stimulating and being overwhelmed. So they might try 104 kilos. And then at first it's difficult and they'll find it hard and they might not get all the reps that they want, but then eventually they'll get used to that. And then they'll up it by another 4%. So that would be like what? 108 point, someone help me out here. About 100, anyway, like between 108 and 109. So then, that'll be hard again, but then after a while they'll get used to it and that'll be the new normal, and then they'll up it. So this is what you should do with your times, right? When you are getting 80% correct, you can do those questions in time, but time yourself so that you've got a reference of how long it's taken you to get 80% correct on those questions. And then, so let's say you're doing it in, 30 minutes and the goal is 22 minutes. So then maybe the next time you want to aim to do it in 29 minutes. And that'll be difficult at first. It will feel too fast. You won't have enough time, but eventually you'll get used to it. So then you think, okay, right, let's up it to 28 minutes. Or bring it down to 28 minutes, but up the speed to 28 minutes. And then just keep doing like that as you are getting used to it. It's difficult getting used to the new speed, but you finally eventually get comfortable with it, and then you up it again until you're at the point where you're doing it at the pace required for the exam. Then in terms of, so here's some resources that you can use. Like I say, my YouTube channel, I have a playlist for each individual section where I've got like 3 or 4 of my best videos. Let me just put the chat again in the chat. So if you go on playlists on this channel, you'll be able to find, I would say some really good videos that are going to help you understand the basics. So that's like the postcard version. They're good summaries for maybe the night before the exam. But I'd recommend you use a more detailed course to start off with, and also, like I said, I'll send you a discount to one that I recommend, which is ours. And then, like I say, so once you're onto implementation, you want question banks and maybe some one-on-one lessons to help you check your technique. And then once you get into examination mode, you can also have lessons to help with that. But yeah, you're then into timed practice. Cool. So this is a video on the YouTube channel again that's going to give you a good plan for how to prepare, and it talks about timings and how long to spend during each session and all of that sort of stuff. So it goes into a lot more detail than what I've talked about. But I've used this analogy, a thousand times probably now, of when you're preparing for the UCAT, see it like a sprint. So when you're doing this, it's a mental agility test, right? They are testing your ability to deliver really like complex questions and things that you need to work out under pressure, right? And you need to do them on demand at speed, right? So when you're sprinting, when people train for sprinting, they sprint for very short bursts and rest for long bursts. Because if you were to sprint all day non-stop and just keep sprinting, obviously what would happen? Your speed would go down and you would probably injure yourself. You're not training optimally. So the concept really here is that you need to, the exam's 2 hours. So I wouldn't really go and exert yourself mentally for more than 2 hours because you'll just burn out. So what you want to do is do those 2 hour stints, then take a rest, do another 2 hour stint, take a rest. And, you can maybe fit 3 2 hour stints in a day. That's quite a lot, but 2 2 hour stints. It's just remembering that you kind of will hit a point of not just diminishing returns, but reducing returns. Because every year I get emails and questions like, I'm putting more time in, I'm doing 6 hours a day and my scores are getting worse. And that's why. It's because if you were to sprint for 6 hours a day, your speed would go down. And yeah, you need to just bear that in mind to avoid burnout. So I think this is just from a previous one. So we did a mock test that was live to the public back in April. And for those of you who are on the FutureDoc program, we'll do regular mock tests for you to make sure that you're keeping up to date. So yeah, you can use, there are lots of mock tests out there you can use, but the most important thing is to use the mock test to get a gauge of where you are, but also you need to use those mock tests you need to really go through them. Our mock test, just to give you an idea, when we do the mock test, we spend 2 hours doing the exam, and then we spend probably about 6 hours going through all the answers, what you should, like when you see a question, instinctively, this is what you should be thinking, understanding that making sure that people have got the right technique, but also the right kind of way of approaching questions. So it's really important not just to review the questions you got wrong, but the questions you got right as well, and why you're getting those right. So don't just do a mock and then, like, the mocks are so valuable. Don't just do one and forget about it. Do it, and then the good stuff comes when you go through it after. So yeah, and this is just to say, if you guys, we've got a few places open for our one-on-one coaching program if you want to apply. We are in busy season. It's, especially as the UCAT's opening in a few days, we are starting to run out of places. But yeah, it's application only. So you have to submit an application. It has to be successful, and then you have an interview with somebody in our team just to make sure that you're suitable, and you're the kind. It's more around people's attitudes, and because our program, like I say, we've been doing this a long time now, and our success rate is really good, and I believe that as long as people have the right attitude and the right basic building blocks, we can mold a lot of that stuff. So it's not so much about it's more about your desires for coming into medicine and your attitude, and are you the right kind of person for us to take on the program, so we can teach you to help you get there. So yeah, but like I say, it's an application and an interview, and if you're successful with that, you're on the program, and then we can help you. Right, so as I said, we have a special guest. So Daisy was on the FutureDoc program, and I believe got, obviously I'll let her introduce herself, but I believe got a 3,100-ish and absolutely smashed it, and was really methodical, and just the way she went about her approach was exactly, you know, how we would recommend doing it. So what I'm going to do is hand over to her to just very quickly introduce herself, and really for the rest of the session I just want to give you guys the opportunity to ask questions, and we can answer those. So Daisy, just tell everybody a little bit about who you are and how things are going, and yeah, a little bit about your journey.
Hi, my name's Daisy. I'm currently at Newcastle University. I just finished my first year. As Dr. Ash said, I joined the FutureDoc program back in end of 2020, I think. And yeah, I got 3,010, not quite 3,100, but yeah, I got 3,010 in my UCAT. So I just thought I'd come here today and talk a little bit about why and how I got the score I got. So I haven't been on this whole call, but I have heard a few things that Dr. Ash has said about sprint training, things like that. I remember when he told me the exact same thing. Do listen to it, it does work. So I spent about 5 weeks practicing for the UCAT. I mean, it changes for everyone, I think. If you feel like you need more or less, that's fine. I gave myself about 5-6 weeks. So I started it off by doing a little bit of untimed practice. I just wanted to get myself used to how the exam works. And then after, say, a week and a half, I ramped it up, and then I started doing time practice. At this point, I think I sat a baseline mock. Dr. Ash might have recommended it. Sit maybe a mock on the official UCAT website or on Medify or something like that. And that can be helpful just to get an idea of where you're at the moment. After I'd done that, as I said, I moved on to my timed practice. Here, I was using, it's not Medify. Yes, it is Medify. I was using their practice UCATs. So I did their mini mocks, or I did certain time questions, just to kind of get an idea of the timing. Because if you stay on untimed practice, you can get 100%, but at the end of the day, it's not necessarily the questions themselves that are hard. It's the timing that's the challenging part of this exam. So then about 2.5 weeks in, I moved on to mocks. So I decided to do about a mock a day, which may seem like a lot, but you know, it just kind of gets you used to the time and things like that. One of my, I say it now because I always forget this, I loved doing this, and it really did help me. I sat my exam at 2:00 in the afternoon. I would make sure that when you plan when you're going to sit your exam, do it around sort of your own timetable. So I know that I like to get up late and I like to treat myself in the morning. If you're one of those people that's going to worry, sit it earlier in the morning. I also, when I do my mock every day, I always sat my mock at 2 p.m. Kind of gets your body clock used to when you should be sitting your exam. After your exam, after you've sat your mock, I think you should spend about an hour at least reviewing your mock. It's important to do the mocks and to do all this practice, but at the end of the day, if you do it and you're not learning from the mistakes that you've made, you're never going to improve. So make sure that you're spending just as long reviewing as you are actually doing your mocks. So then about a week before, I did ramp it up. I was doing about 2 mocks a day at one point. That's not something I necessarily recommend. If you feel like that's going to make you burnt out or things like that, don't do that. For me, my attitude was, if I can do 2 mocks a day and I can get through that, I can get through one exam and be absolutely fine. And again, I spent just as long reviewing them. In the days before, I think I calmed down a bit. I might have done maybe like 1 mock and then a few questions in the evening or a few questions in the morning. And again, the day before my exam, I didn't do any mock. I did just a few timed questions, just a little bit of practice, because I didn't want to start worrying myself or anything like that. The morning of the exam, because I sat mine at 2, I think I just got up and I did a few questions here and there. I didn't sit a mock. There was no point me worrying for something like that. And then obviously I sat the exam and came out with 3,010. I think for everyone, it's different for everyone. If you feel like you need more than 5 weeks, that's absolutely fine. Some people need like 2 months, and then some people feel like they can do it in 1 month. Yeah, I don't want to go into like loads of detail about all the sections because I could be here like all day. But there are loads of videos I know on Dr. Ash's YouTube. There's like loads. I've got a video on there as well, basically me going through all the sections as well. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'd recommend watching that video by Daisy, because it's really good. It's about 30 minutes, and she just literally goes section by section of how she did it, and yeah, it's really really helpful. Okay, cool. So does anyone? You can either put it in the chat, or you can unmute and ask, either myself or Daisy while you've got her, if you want to ask her any questions specifically that we haven't covered yet.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah, who's that?
Hi, this is Nad.
Oh, hi Nad, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, good. How can we help?
Yeah, I just had a question regarding I think I watched one of your videos where you talked about impossible questions.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you identify? I think maybe this is like I think I was watching the video for verbal reasoning where you were talking about impossible questions, but I guess it applies to all the sections. How would you like identify those ones and know that you just have to move on? And if you've got time, come back.
So I guess the impossible. So impossible questions, I'd say, are more for like quantitative reasoning. So the verbal reasoning ones, it's more about size, because if you've got a massive paragraph or section to get through, and you're trying to read all of that and answer all the questions, it's going to be really difficult to extract the information that you need from that in the time. Where if you think you could, like, you guess, if you guess, depending on the type of the question, there's a good chance that you'll pick up some marks just by guessing, flagging, and moving on. However, if you think about it, in that time, you could probably, in time of the really long ones, you could probably do 2 quite short passages as well. So if you think about it in terms of getting through the exam, potential marks that you could pick up, etc., it's about tactics really more than anything else. So that these are all just methods to speed up. The same with the quantitative reasoning. Once you've done a little bit, once you've got into the swing of things and you've got some practice, you'll understand how difficult some questions are by going like, okay, because really what you're doing in your head when you see quantitative reasoning stuff is you're first going, right, what do I actually need to work out here? What calculations do I need to do to know the answer or to get to the answer? And sometimes it's like, okay, I just need to divide this by this or whatever. But sometimes it's like, right, I need to divide this by this. That gives me, the proportion of whatever to whatever, and then I need to move it over to here and do this calculation, and then I need to add these two. And once you kind of in the 4-step process, it's like I can get to this answer, but is it really worth me spending the time required to get it? Whereas all marks are equal. There are no more marks for one question than there are for others. So it's about time management and exam management. Daisy, do you have anything you want to add to that?
About impossible questions,
Mm-hmm.
There are definitely impossible questions in the UCAT. I tackled them by when it comes with practice, you kind of start being able to pick out which questions you think I'm never going to be able to get that in the time. When I was in my exam or when I was practicing, if I find a question where I think I'm never going to be able to do this, I will just guess, flag, skip, and if I have time at the end, I'll come back to it. There's no point sitting there wasting all your time in the exam on that one question that you're never going to get.
Cool. Does that help, Ned?
Yeah, it does. I also had a quick question regarding your UCAT course, ACE the UCAT course.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, because I just recently purchased it like 1 or 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think I watched one of your UCAT videos where you recommend, choosing one section and focusing on it and then keeping it in like maintenance mode when you move on to the next section.
Yeah, that's what we talked about earlier, yeah.
So would you recommend me, just for example, I've started with verbal reasoning, watching the videos for verbal reasoning, and then practicing just verbal reasoning and getting that to a good standard and then moving on?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say don't. I would say spend intense focus on one. I wouldn't say like, so really what you want to be doing is, so it's kind of like you want to, the overarching goals, the overall thing is to make sure that you're kind of progressing through those 3 stages of familiarization, doing questions, and then upping the speed with doing it as timed practice, right? That's like how you globally want to be progressing. It's a bit like when you revise for exams. You want to be, you want to get yourself exam ready, but you might be doing biology revision, physics revision, and so kind of progressing to that stage, but different ones might be progressing at different rates, right? And you'll do a bit of biology for a couple of days and you'll see some big improvement, and you'll probably, that bit will move closer to where you want to be, but then the other ones don't. So I wouldn't say you would, like, when you're preparing for your GCSEs, you would never say revise biology non-stop until you are ready to sit your biology exam. You would say, right, time it so that everything is kind of progressing steadily. So what I mean with intense focus is that so it's a bit like, when you do focused work, when you're really productive, if you spend 10 minutes on, 10 minutes off for, I don't know, let's say 4 hours, or you spend the equivalent of 2 really focused hours and then 2 hours off, that you'd definitely do a lot more in that time, in that 2 hours, than you would if you were doing 10 minutes here and there, because you get into, you become focused, you get into the groove, you really kind of like, that time compounds over the course of doing it frequently. So what I'm saying here is that the intensity with which you put into those sections will help compound more, as in it will help you improve at a quicker rate if you're doing it with, like I say, with focus on one thing at a time. Now, there's obviously the extreme where you can't focus too much on one area because you can't neglect the others, but it's getting the balance right of like, okay, if I was just to do 1 hour every day of each section versus 5 hours of one section one day, 5 hours of a different section the next day, and so on, that would show much more improvement over time. But the other thing I will say with this is that, these are just suggestions, right? They're all tools that we give. And this is why, when we're helping people one-on-one, there are different ways to approach it for different people. And it's helping you work out which tool is best to, to suit your particular needs. And I can give you lots of different tools, but at the same time, you need to try them out to see which one works best for you. I'm not saying there's one definitive way. There are lots of things. There are lots of ways to approach it. Daisy, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think when you start practicing, you'll find the way that works for you. The way that worked for me may not necessarily work for everyone else. But that's all. I think you covered everything.
Right. Anyone else did that help, by the way? So I can't remember who it was that spoke. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really cool. Yeah, thank you.
Good. Anyone else have any questions?
Hello, I have a question.
Shay?
Yes, I have been practicing a lot in one section by one section. I don't see any much improvement about the accuracy.
Yeah. So, I mean, it does take, it will take a bit of time. So a lot of people, what I say, the progress is a bit like, it's like a staircase of improvement. So you'll have, a lot of people find that, they plateau in certain areas, but if you keep going, you will eventually push through a threshold and you'll get to the next plateau. And then that will take a bit of time and you'll say like, oh God, I'm not getting anywhere, but then you'll improve again. So it's a bit like, there's that book, Atomic Habits, that I had heard about for years, but I've only just read recently. It's actually fantastic when he talks about when you're plateauing, actually, people think of it that they're not improving or they're like even maybe getting worse or stagnating, but actually he makes a very good point that essentially all you're doing is just putting in the time and loading loading the bases for you to just be propelled to the next level. And sometimes I think when people are feeling like they're plateauing, they're a bit like, oh, right, here we go. But everybody goes through it, and everybody thinks, right, at this rate, you know, if I carry on at the same pace that I did for the last 2 or 3 days where my scores aren't improving, I'm never going to get ready in time for the exam. But people find that they do show a lot of improvement towards the end. But yeah, I mean, if you feel like you really are struggling and you're not improving, then you know you can always you can come to us and get some help, or you know there are lots of people that can help advise you and you know check, you know, one-on-one what you're doing in terms of like how you're approaching questions, what kind of techniques you're using. What I think really it's training that knee-jerk reaction to like, okay, when this happens, I don't even think about it. I immediately shoot into this. So yeah, so yeah, I would take solace in the fact that we've still got, it's not quite a month now, but we've got almost a month until the exam. I mean, if you're sitting it later in the window, you've still got ages. So don't worry too much about that sort of stuff. But remember, people do go through plateaus and then they have a breakthrough and then they reach a new plateau.
Okay.
Daisy, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I was going to say I had the exact same thing. I wouldn't worry about it too much. I think I can't remember what it was. I think it was my verbal reasoning. I got stuck at 500 for a very long time. You tend to have to just take a step back. Maybe you're not reviewing it and you're not, maybe you're using a technique. Maybe you should try a different technique if you feel like you just can't move on. But again, as Dr. Ashley said, I also made most of my improvements towards the end. It's sort of the last week where you want to come at your best point towards the end. So don't sort of burn yourself out. If you need to take a step back from a section because you're not improving, that's fine. You can just go back to it and hopefully you'll improve there.
Okay. One more question. How many
Could you speak up a little bit? It's a bit quiet where you are.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's a bit better.
Yeah, what I mean is how many hours a day you recommend we can do the practice, like 2 hours or 4 hours, or I mean how long after you do the untimed questions and you start doing timed questions?
Sorry, Shay, I could only catch a little bit of that. Basically, how much time in terms of hours would you spend preparing? Daisy, do you wanna take that one?
I think it depends on the point that you're at in your revision. At the beginning, when you're doing your on-time practice, maybe like a couple hours a day, because you also want to spend your time reviewing. When you get to you're doing a mock a day, so how long's a mock? An hour and a half? I can't actually remember.
I think the full, it depends which ones you do. Some of the, like the official ones, are still the full 2 hours.
All right, okay. So if you set a 2-hour mock, then you want to spend maybe an hour and a half on top of that revising. And then maybe around that, you might want to do a couple questions in the morning and evening. So maybe half an hour in the morning and evening. When you ramp up your revision at the highest point, you want to be doing, or at this point, I was doing a 2-hour mock, an hour and a half review, and maybe like mini mocks in the morning or evening. I mean, at the point where I was doing 2 mocks a day, obviously that sounds ridiculous. You're spending 6 hours, which which sounds silly when I say it. So you don't necessarily have to sit there and do 6 hours a day for 5 weeks or 4 hours a day for 5 weeks. That's quite a lot. You don't want to burn out. So start maybe an hour or an hour and a half and then ramp up as you get closer to your exam.
Yeah, and keep be very I guess acute, like have very good sensory acuity on yourself. So be very aware of how you're getting on. Are you feeling burnt out? Are you feeling fresh? Are you feeling tired when you come across questions? And that's probably a sign that you probably need to just tone it down a little bit. But then there are kind of, when Daisy talks about doing the test and reviewing the test, they're two very different levels of intensity, right? When you sit in questions, obviously you're really focused and concentrating. Then when you're reviewing stuff, it's a bit more leisurely. You can take that at your own pace. You're reading through stuff. You're not it's not the same pressure as when you're doing an exam. So kind of like think of kind of almost categorize the preparation by what intensity that it's going to be and how much you've got the capacity for it at that time. Because, you know, it might be really difficult to, you might be really tired one day and you think, you know what, like, I don't think it's actually going to be any benefit to me to be doing loads of questions because I'm probably just going to get a bad score and ruin my confidence. So then maybe that's the time to go over and maybe review, you know, your online course again, or take the time to just refresh some techniques or something like that, rather than just trying to constantly just hammer intense questions. It's like you've got different, like I say, what I'm saying is you've got different levels of intensity. Maybe if you're really just not feeling it, you can just try some untimed stuff, but you don't want to get too much out of the practice of doing it at speed. But like I say, you can tailor the preparation to kind of the mood that you're in.
My question is, how many percent of accuracy you had before you start doing timed questions?
80%.
80%.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it's not like a hard rule, but that's roughly what I'd recommend.
If it's lower than 80%, I do continue start untimed questions.
I would. That's what I would recommend. Yeah, but you don't want to leave it too late. You need to get used to doing time questions. But yeah, 80% is about the benchmark. I do a video. I think it's the one called in exam tactics, what to do on the day, and I break down like what if you get, you know, 80% of questions right, what score that will correlate to. So let me see if I can find that. While I'm looking for that, does anybody else want to ask another question? Just feel free to unmute and yeah.
Thank you.
When you did your, or for Daisy, sorry, this is a question for Daisy. When you did your untimed practice, and before you went on to your time practice, when you did a mock between those two stages, what scores were you getting? And then based off those scores, how did you tailor your practice to maximize your increase in progress every day?
So are you talking in terms of like when I did my baseline mock, what did I come up with?
Yeah.
Okay, so when I did my baseline mock, honestly, I was not getting fantastic scores. I think I came out with like an average of like 420 per section. So you're not expected to do brilliant at that stage. It's just to get an idea of what the mock's like and sort of what it's all about. I think when you realize what sections you should be focusing on, that's when you're doing your untimed practice. When you kind of start realizing, oh, okay, I don't quite like that section. I personally hated abstract reasoning. When I started practicing, when I did my untimed and when I did my baseline mock, I thought, like, what is this? I have no idea how to tackle this. So then I thought, okay, maybe I should spend a little bit of time on that to maximize it. Yeah, I think I write down every score I got and every mock I did, I wrote down my scores. I think you can start comparing and tracking your progress as you go along. So when I did my baseline mock, after I thought, okay, I'll focus on abstract reasoning and verbal reasoning for a bit because I know I've done worse on those. Then you do your next mock and you think, okay, I've improved. Now I can maybe focus on decision making because I've realized I've fallen behind on that. Where you feel like you're falling behind, maybe just spend a little bit of extra time. So in the mornings and evenings where I knew I was doing terrible at abstract reasoning, I thought, okay, I'll do a few little questions here and there. And yeah, that's how I did it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Perfect. So let's take a couple more questions and then we'll probably wrap it up there. So anybody else want to ask anything else? Oh, Abdur?
Hi. I just wanted to ask, between Medify and MedEntry, is there any like benefit from doing one other than the other?
Daisy, you've got experience with both, haven't you?
I used Medify. I remember having a look at MedEntry. You can find plenty of comparisons. If you go on the student room, you'll probably find like tons of comparisons between the two. I seem to remember Medify being, it was just told to me as the most accurate and representative of the actual UCAT. But obviously there are always going to be differences between them. I don't think it necessarily matters which one you use if you prefer one over the other. I personally used Medify, but I know people that use MedEntry.
And I'd say so Medify, some people say that maybe the VR and the SJT are probably the least like the ones that aren't quite as representative. You got to remember that, like, as great as these resources are, they're all the best guesses, right? There's the official UCAT stuff, and that is, you know, that is them making the exam. And then the people who are providing these question banks, they're doing their best estimate or the best approximation of what the exam is like. So, you know, they do a very good job of it, but you're never going to get as real as the official ones on the UCAT website. So I would recommend using those mocks very wisely. People say typically that the mocks on the UCAT website, those official ones, are a little bit more challenging, they felt, than in the real one. That could be true. It could also be because obviously when you sit your exam, you're usually at your peak ability in this, if you've prepared well. So it might just be that, you know, when people are sitting those mocks prior to that, when they're not quite at their best, it feels like a bit of a shock. But anyway, you know, like I say, there are no better mimics of the exam than the actual official ones. So yeah, make sure that you utilize those the resources on the UCAT website well and intelligently. Cool. Right, let's take one final question and then we'll wrap it up there. And I'll give you some resources as well to use.
Hello?
Hi.
Excuse me.
Sorry, this is Nad again. But
yeah, Nad, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask Daisy whether did she just track her progress for mocks, or would you recommend tracking progress for like doing, because you do untimed questions at the start as well, and then you move to timed questions. So should I be tracking my progress for everything I do?
Yeah, I think it's worth tracking things like mini mocks and time practice. Untimed practice is a little bit different. I think track your progress where you think, okay, I'm finding abstract reasoning or verbal reasoning a little bit more difficult. But yeah, I do think it's worth tracking everything that you do just so you can see where you're falling behind or where you're doing like a bit better. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah, and like I said, and you know, when we helping people on the program, we actually give them a score tracker and we make a revision timetable together and all that sort of stuff. So it does help. Yeah, definitely helps you visualize. It also helps you keep motivated if you're seeing that you're improving. And then when you do have a breakthrough, like I say, if you have plateaued, it does help with that as well. So yeah, definitely, worth keeping an eye on things. Okay, perfect. All right, so let's wrap it up there. So like I say, I'm going to send you an email with loads of resources. We've got I've just checked, we've got a few places left on the program if anyone wants to apply. Here's where you can submit your application. Like I say, we are reaching peak season with, you know, it's all getting very real at the moment. UCAT booking opens in 2 days. People are, you know, realizing that it's fast approaching now. So, you know, the program's got a ridiculously good success rate of getting people in, and you know, we're always improving it, always making sure that we're doing everything we can to support our students. So really worth submitting an application. The price is something we talk about on the call, because it's you know, firstly, like I say, we have to make sure that you're suitable, and then it will kind of depend on a few things. So yeah, it's something that we'll chat about on the call. But yeah, submit an application, see if you qualify, and it'd be great to have you on the program where, you know, we go into all of this stuff in a lot more depth. There are lots of layers to the UCAT onion, and yeah, lots that we can do to help you get the score that you need, but also, like I say, it's part of the wider thing that is the rounded med school application that we need to focus on as well and not ignore. So yeah, thanks everybody for coming. Like I say, the weather's still really nice where I am. I hope it's nice where you guys are and you can go out and enjoy your day. But yeah, thank you all for coming, and I will see you soon.